let's hope for a pope who will do his best to give tradition its rights.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to this episode of the John Henry Weston Show, where I've got for you a guest who I got to know when he worked with us here at LifeSite News. His name is Kennedy Hall. He is a YouTuber who runs a great YouTube channel called Mere Tradition. He is the proud dad of 7 children. One's going to be born. I just learned. Congratulations. He goes to the Mass of the Society for St. Pius X, SSPX as they're commonly called, and some interesting things going on with regard to that, because as some of you may know, Pope Benedict tried really his heart out to try and reconcile the church with the SSPX more formally. It's sort of in they call it irregular or something. But with Francis, that became sort of suspended in a way, but there was more freedom given nonetheless. The SSPX were given confessions and marriages to do without any restriction, and then that never ended. And now comes Pope Leo, and I know that the SSPX is wanting to ordain bishops. So a lot of questions with this new pontificate, what's going on in trad world, at least a part of the trad world known as the SSPX. Kennedy, so good to be with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Kennedy, first of all, I wanted to get your reactions to Pope Leo coming out on the balcony. I'm sure you watched it very carefully. Tell us your thoughts.
You know, I, like many, had no idea who Cardinal Prevost was. So I didn't have an immediate reaction to him, either good or bad, because I didn't know what to expect. And I must also say that going into the election, going into the conclave, you know, I wrote a book on modernism recently that was published, and you know, I don't want to sound dour or whatever, but I wasn't expecting like a traditional Catholic pope to come out no matter what. Obviously, there are certain cardinals who would do a much better job. Obviously, a Cardinal Burke or Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Mueller. These men are clearly much more orthodox than many of them. Nonetheless, there really is this allegiance, this really strong attachment to Vatican II, and all of them have a version of, well, we just have to do it better, or the new Mass is great, but we just have to do it better. So I knew that none of them were going to be a quote unquote traditionalist. So I just thought I'll wait and see, and I looked into him, and I thought, okay, he seems like a nice man. His, as the kids say today, his vibe or his aura seemed to be like, hey, you don't seem like a jerk, which is a plus. And I thought we'll just give him the benefit of the doubt and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I could probably say I wish I knew a little less about him when I heard. I was able, with the help of Bishop Strickland, to come to a more hopeful stance. Because, when he was head of the bishops, the congregation or dicastery for bishops, Strickland was the target of that his removal. And so if Bishop Strickland could accept him as Holy Father with open arms, so could I. And definitely, I think that was very healing, not only for me, I think for a lot of Catholics. And so we'll see. I mean, everybody is sort of just waiting and seeing. In a way, I'm saddened by that. It's a different thing, I think, for traditionalists than for me, because as you spoke there about, you weren't expecting. It's funny because I think for a lot of the Catholics who came at the faith from sort of the pro-life movement, in a way you could say, but who weren't part of the liturgy battles back in the day when it started, and they loved a reverent Mass, but they didn't know much about the TLM like me. JP2 was their saint. Ratzinger, then Benedict, was the same old. You expected a pope who was just holy and good and right on all the moral issues. Yeah, your bishop might be screwy, but the pope always had your back. So the Francis thing was just, what was that? In a way, you're hoping for, can we just go back to the Catholic pope? But I guess for people who are more into the liturgy battles, the TLM stuff, this is, as you said, it's something that's gone on for a long time. Tell us about that.
The liturgy stuff is definitely part of it, but it's deeper than that. When you read like when I wrote this recent book, I read so much of the like young Ratzinger and young JP2 and all the, theologians that they were a part of the various groups with and stuff. And it's astonishing to see how much their work kind of moved further towards the, let's call it, conservative side of things, because back in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of stuff where you would really scratch your head at it. Like the average person who just doesn't spend all their time reading old random journals from online, they would look at it and go, there's no way Ratzinger said this. There's no way. But that's the way it was. And so what you realize is that it was just with men like Cardinal Ratzinger, and I didn't know him. Everyone who knew him thought that he was extremely holy man, and I don't doubt that. But he was a product of like the modern philosophical milieu. And so what you find is that although a man like Pope Francis would come to very different conclusions, when you look at the phraseology, you go, there's a lot of similarities in kind of the method they're arguing things. And you see basically this whole atmosphere of modernism is kind of just the official framework for how theology is done in the church today. So I think traditionalists who have been plugged in for a long time, it's not that they don't recognize that, hey, a Benedict was way better than Pope Francis. That's obvious. It's just that there's a deeper problem at the root that's still there. Although I am hopeful it's going to go away. I'm not pessimistic about it, but it's just there nonetheless. So it's more of a realistic thing. Like, okay, let's hope for a pope who will do his best to give tradition its rights, so that in this sort of war for the soul of the church, the true Catholic apostolic tradition will have the ability to overtake the counterfeit. That's kind of the way I think traditionalists look at it, or at least I do.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, it was like, I remember the days when the encyclicals of John Paul would come out and, we would read them feverishly. Not at all the same as now. Now we read them feverishly still, but to try and find the errors, which we know that are going to be in there. Before, it was read them feverishly to find the gems, to learn the faith, to be able to absorb the truth. To finally, we have some clarity on X, Y, Z, or whatever it is, or I know I'm going to be filled with grace by reading this. That all ended. I mean, that was just, with JP2, it was slightly longer and harder. With Benedict, it was more clear and to the point, which I appreciated actually. But it was for me anyway, it was a beauty. And then this happened. Anyway, it was a very different experience, a 12-year long experience, mind you. So anyway, so there's the initial impressions. I think everybody in the church is kind of waiting. But you've got a very interesting thing. I know that the SSPX is very near and dear to your heart. And on the inside of the SSPX, they're going through some things because, they had their initial set of bishops, and then the ones that were ordained in 88, as it were, and caused the kerfuffle and all of that sort of settled down. But what happens now? Because I know that there is a need to have new bishops in the church, in the SSPX, and yet there's this discrepancy with Rome. Are there any hopes that way, thoughts that way? And do you know of anything?
So I don't have any insider information. I do obviously support the society. I tend, and I did write a book on my own that I self-published called SSPX The Defense, but I don't work for the society or anything. I just like to make that clear to people because they think I've been accused of being part of this or that conspiracy, and I'm like, no, I'm just, as Taylor says, I'm a dad with a webcam. Taylor actually has a really nice camera. I'm actually on a webcam, so he can't say that anymore. But there is a lot of information that is public that most people don't know about because it's either in a different language or it's in just some conference talk or something. The SSPX doesn't, do a ton of social media activity and stuff. So, yes, they will need to consecrate bishops. The SSPX has grown probably, 4 or 5 times the amount of parishioners, maybe more than it had in 1988, probably more, maybe 10 times. There's an estimate that they have around 1 million faithful they serve around the world today, many of them in North America and Europe, and many of them in places like Africa and Asia. They have tons of missionaries that are going into different countries in Asia and whatnot all the time. And they have 2 living bishops left. who perform the traditional sacraments that are reserved for bishops. So confirmations, and then, of course, priestly ordinations and consecrations of bishops. So a little background. When Archbishop Lefebvre and Bishop Castro Mayer, who was not of the SSPX, but he was of Brazil, but he was another holdout for the traditional faith at that time, when he went forth with the consecrations, there was a long process of basically trying to have everything to be done in the perfectly legal sense above board. And permission was given to the SSPX in principle, although in actuality, there was never an agreement on when they were allowed to go through with it. So there was an accord reached between Lefebvre and Ratzinger. Anyway, so that was what happened then. And Dom Pagliarani, who was the current superior general of the society, said, I think in 21 or 22, that yes, they're obviously thinking about it. And this was before Bishop Tissier, God rest his soul, had passed away. And he said that they would do the same thing. So there's going to be no middle of the night consecration or, secret thing, whatever. It will be something where they will present themselves to the Holy Father and they will say, this is our intention and we would like your blessing to do so. And if you'd like us to blah, 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 do this and that, we will do this. And then the only way they would go through with it without permission is if they've exhausted all the options and then it becomes clear that for the preservation of the traditional priesthood, there's no other way, the state of necessity, so to speak. And that's the plan. So since they've gone down to 2 bishops, there have been various general superiors or district superiors, Italy, Germany, and so forth, who have said, yes, this is something we'll see in the near future. So this probably means next year, probably not this year, because it would usually happen in the summer. Although, for all I know, they're having conversations right now and have been. So it remains to be seen. Personally, I really think that Pope Leo will want to avoid another 1988 for a couple reasons. Number one, things are very different than they were in 1988. Tradition at the time was like this very niche, seemingly rebellious thing. Now it's like the bee's knees, and the biggest, pilgrimage in the church is the traditional Catholics walking in France. So it's making the mainstream media, for goodness sake. And our mutual friend Taylor Marshall, the biggest English-speaking Catholic podcaster in the world, is talking about how much he loves Lefebvre on his channel and things like that. So things are just very, very different than they were then. And the 1988 fallout was very confusing because canonically it was a very specious or dubious decision, which canon lawyers had been yelling at each other about for the last 37 years. And Pope Leo is a canon lawyer. So, I think that's important because he's going to want to have a real solution to this. So what will he do? My gut tells me he'll want to find a solution. I don't know what'll be, but my speculation is that there will be permission for at least a couple bishops, and I'm thinking that we'll start to see some other bishops in the church sort of help the society out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense because there are differences everywhere. I went to Kenya and I was in Nairobi, and I was at the only Latin Mass in all of Nairobi. It was at an SSPX church, and it was a wonderful Mass. And I went and I talked to the priest after, and I said, Father, how's your relationship here with the diocese and stuff like that? Oh, it's great. But what about, do they, how does that work? Because, you're SSPX. He said, no, that's not here. So the diocese there is endorsing people who want the Latin Mass to go to the SSPX church. And as from America, from Canada, that's like super shocking because you have some cardinals even in the church who say that's it's
no bueno.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So that was stunning. And Father explained to me, it's because Lefebvre was here and helped the Africans out. So there's a very different sense, and so
it's very different. And you know what? It's interesting you mention Africa because when you talk to SSPX missionaries in the third world, so to speak, they have a very different story. The SSPX situation it's what you want to make of it. If you want to make of it a positive situation, you can easily do that with all the information out there. If you want to make it of a negative situation, you can try to do that. It's hard, but you can do that. You can say, well, yeah, they have permission for that, but what about this or whatever? And you can do the whole legalism thing. But in the third world, they're just thinking to themselves, well, we'd like souls to be saved, and we'd like people to go to heaven. That's kind of what we do. And so these priests are willing to go out into the bush and build schools and give people the sacraments. We'll probably just give them a high five and say, go for it, because we don't even have enough. We don't have enough anyway. I mean, Novus Ordo priests in Africa are basically missionaries, walking out and walking 20 miles to say mass, and they give them chickens when they leave because they don't have any money to give them for a stipend. I don't think high on their priority list is debates about an irregular canonical status. I don't think it's really something that matters too much.
Yep. Nope, that's exactly the case. Pope Pius XI said, men must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. And he urged that the faithful give public honor to Christ the King so that individuals and states would submit once more to the rule of their Savior. And that is why LifeSite News is raising up the image of Christ the King across the United States. And you can help us reach millions more. Please pledge your support today for these billboards at lifefunder.com/Christ is King. There's an interesting thing I found out recently, not too recently, but recent enough, that the world of the fraternity, which everybody knows as the Latin Mass world, has very few priests. They have about 300, slightly more than 300 priests. The other sort of fraternity or institute that has the Latin Mass that everybody knows it for is the Institute of Christ the King, about 150 priests. So that's it for the whole wide world? Yes, actually, which sounds really weird. And then there's the SSPX, which, as far as I know,
like 800 or something like that.
That's right. So the numbers are insane. There's more than in the SSPX than there are in all the traditional orders of Latin TLM priests combined, which is stunning all by itself. And I guess part of the reason why Benedict was really looking toward some kind of full reconciliation. Did you ever find out what happened back then when Benedict had it sort of squared away with Archbishop Fillet at the time?
Yeah, so there was, it's like many things from Rome. We'll find out some of the details when certain people die, right? That's what Father Murr always says, He says, I can tell the stories now because all my friends have passed away,
Yeah.
The strongest, I don't want to say rumor, but the strongest suggestion is that there was discord and there was tension on both sides. So within the SSPX, there was a lot of apprehension about the notion of a personal prelature offer, which was basically what the Opus Dei had. They sort of still have it, but they don't have a prelate anymore. So it's not really sure if it's a prelature in the sense because they don't have a bishop. That was something that was apparently on the table. On the other hand, the word on the street is that there were a cardinal or two close to Benedict who were very unhappy about an SSPX path forward and pressured him to basically pull the plug. We don't really know the full answer. What I do know, though, and I can say this for certain because some of these things have been released publicly, the thing about the SSPX is a lot of it's in French, and I'm a French speaker and whatever, so I can, but most people aren't that are sort of Anglo-North Americans. And a part of the conversation between the SSPX and Rome, a lot of it was doctrinal. So a lot of it is like boring for most people behind the scenes, basically submitting essays back and forth about how to understand particular points of doctrine expressed in the Second Vatican Council. And on that, they basically reached loggerheads and couldn't come to some sort of agreement on certain points. And they kind of reached an impasse. And those points, largely speaking, have to do with things that maybe we can talk about how Leo will have to deal with this, having to do with things like synodality, things like collegiality, and things like religious liberty, which are all in one. If you interpret them in a pre-conciliar way, either errors or heresies. If you try to interpret them in a post-conciliar way, you still get into some murky waters if you're trying to keep the traditional Catholic perception. So that's something that still has to be figured out.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of right now with Leo using buzzwords like synodality, like ecumenism and all sorts of things. But honestly, I think we have to wait till we know what he means by them, because I remember well the Pope Benedict and his use of ecology, and people were like, at first, very scared that oh no, he's going to pick up the whole population control bit. And then when he used it, he turned it right on its head and freaked out the other side, if you will. He talked about a human ecology, how we need to respect that God created us male and female. And just, he blew, it was awesome. So I wouldn't mind at all if Leo were using the terms and meaning them in a proper Catholic sense. It would be awesome. So yeah, we're waiting, we're hoping to see what comes down the line.
I think, for example, there will be, I think that Pope Leo is going to restore permission for the traditional Mass. Because, and I think he's going to use, this is just like a gut feeling. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just an idiot on the internet. But my reasoning for that is, so I think you probably saw the Mass of Ages 3. I was at the premiere in Chicago last year, whatever, and they had an interesting part of the film where they showed how after Pope Francis had put in Traditionis Custodes, basically sending the traditional Mass back to the restrictions it was under in 1984 under JP2, although in fairness to JP2, that was an opening up, whereas with Francis, it was a restriction, but it was the same sort of parameters. The bishops themselves were basically surveyed on it, and the majority of them either did nothing about it, which was interesting, meaning they didn't implement it, or a small minority were really positive on it, meaning they really wanted to hammer down and beat those trads over the head with a stick. Whereas a lot of them were kind of not really that fond of it and found the most liberating way possible to interpret it. So basically, if we're into synodality, if we're into collegiality, meaning we think that the local bishops should have a lot more say, blah, 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 and all these kinds of things, if that's really what we mean, and we want to hear the voices of the faithful and blah, 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 then they have an airtight argument to just say, the people have spoken, the bishops of the world have spoken, and the synodality and collegiality, blah, 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 they really want access to this. So in fraternal communion and by, the whatever of encounter with our brother Christians and whatever, we would like them to have access to this thing that's meaningful to them. I really think that's the path forward for it.
So we have to be welcoming and accepting,
exactly,
even of those
all
sisters
are welcome,
and
even
brothers of ours who may be different to ourselves. Oh my gosh, yeah, might very well be. There is a path forward. I've always found it funny because I noticed some of the conservative, we had some conservative bishops really hunt down the traditional Mass and restrict it to all get out. Not because they really wanted to, but out of, wanting to obey and be proper and right and I don't know what. But I did notice some of the more liberal bishops who weren't ideological, like they weren't like Supich or McElroy, who just, they have an ideology that they're following. It's just the opposite one of the faith. They're going to pursue it like Casey and stomp it out too. But I found the liberal bishops who really don't care, they're trying to get their diocese going, they saw the cash flow coming in from the TLM and were like, yeah, we're not doing that. We're going to relegate that to the same place we put it when some other papal command came down and we did nothing about it because it was on the other side, and we're like, yeah, whatever. They were just, yeah, that's nice. Next.
Even in my diocese, which is super liberal, like my diocese, God bless the bishop, during COVID, and they shut down stuff faster than the government even told them to, and opened it up slower than the government told them to. Like they were way more, they were more with the virus than Doug Ford, and which is hard to imagine anyone being more happy about COVID than the Ontario government. And so even during that time, they put out a letter saying Catholics under no circumstances could go to the SSPX even if no other sacraments were available. That's how much, that's the disdain, which isn't even what the church says about the Orthodox, for goodness sake. So it wouldn't even fit, even if you thought they were in schism, that still wouldn't apply, according to the 83 Code of Canon Law. So but even here, he hasn't shut down the TLM because the diocese is failing. And the only place where you have more babies, the only place where you have more infants in diapers than elderly parishioners is at the traditional Mass. And that's a lot of money that they would have to say goodbye to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's stunning. And it's funny because all these families with large numbers of children tend also to give more generously. It's just an incredible thing. Just on economics alone, it makes sense.
Protecting your money doesn't have to be complicated. With stocks, bonds, and crypto, it's easy to feel lost. But gold and silver have been trusted for centuries as a simple, stable store of value in uncertain times. If you had invested $35,000 in gold at the millennium, an amount you can give today tax-free to anyone you love, it would have grown to be worth over $325,000. Call our team at 610-326-2000 and let us step you through crafting a solution for your family.
Anyway, Kennedy, final thoughts on Pope Leo, the future of the church, and the SSPX.
My final thoughts are that he will try to find a path forward, which is a path of least resistance. So I don't believe that, and who knows what will happen, but I don't believe there will be any sort of official new thing, or, all the dioceses have to use them like a parish. I think it'll be more something like, in keeping with my predecessors who have consistently and fraternal communion, blah, 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 we would like to extend our thanks to the society and give them our blessing to continue with what they do. And for their needs, we will allow them permission to have X amount of bishops. And we encourage the bishops of the world to work closely with them in a spirit of dialogue or something. Like, I really think it'll be something like that. And then they'll continue.
You could just write it for him, Kennedy. That would be great.
Well, honestly, JH, writing that modernism book that I wrote, I could write a dissertation as if I was James Martin right now, and you wouldn't even know the difference. I know it so well. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Kennedy Hall from Mere Tradition. So good to be with you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time.
Aloha everyone, this is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.